Greetings, everyone. I'm Mike Lemire, and welcome to original documentary series, 40 Miles. The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad told us that his teacher, the Savior, Master Fard Muhammad, once said that he would walk up a mountain 40 miles high to teach one man. Well, the highest mountain in the world is Mount Everest, 29,141 feet, or a little over 5 miles. And many people have died trying to reach the top of Mount Everest. And that's nowhere close to a 40-mile journey. Why would the Savior use the analogy of a mountain? In the Quran, Surah 90, verses 12 to 16, it talks about the uphill road, the freeing of a slave, the feeding of an orphan or a poor man. The uphill road is the work of resurrecting a mentally and spiritually dead people. And for 40 years, absent his teacher, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad climbed that mountain, dedicated his life to the upliftment of Black and oppressed people all over the world. And on that 40th year, he departed from us. Walk up a mountain 40 miles high to teach one man. It's no coincidence that after 40 years, one man, Elijah Muhammad's top student, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, stood up to continue his teacher's work. 40 Miles, the series, commemorates these years. 40 Miles represents the mission. It represents the love one must have to embark on this mission. It represents courage, faith, belief, and the willingness to struggle against opposition to walk the uphill road. It represents our nation, the Nation of Islam. In this series, we're going to look at the history of the Nation of Islam. This growing nation that has defied all odds, producing world leaders and icons. What is the truth about the Nation of Islam? We'll unveil it all here. Welcome to 40 Miles.
There were no uniformed policemen assigned inside this ballroom.
But we are going to pick our heroes from today on.
I'm from the world. I'm from God. I'm from the real God.
We're filming inside the historic Final Call Administration Building. This is one of the first buildings purchased by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan during the rebuilding of the nation. This episode, we're going to take a look at what it took for the minister to rebuild the nation. Today, we have Mosque Mariam, the Salam restaurant, mosque in every major city in America, mosque in Africa, Europe, the Caribbean, universities across the country, new businesses opening nearly every year, and the nation is really just getting started. But what you may not have known is that when the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan stood up to accept this mission in 1977, he basically had nothing. All he had was love for his people and the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He departed in 1975. His son assumed power, and within a few years, the nation as we once knew it was completely gone. To understand how devastating this fall was, you have to understand how great the Nation of Islam had become.
I would like to just read to you a list of some of the enterprises of the Nation of Islam. You know, this nation that they talk about that operates mom and pop shops. We'll show you exactly what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is truly doing. Salam Restaurant, the Muslim import stores, the Muslim fish house, the Shabazz grocery store, the Shabazz bakery and coffee shop, Temple No. 2 clothing store and office building, the Guarantee Bank and Trust Company, Progressive Land Development, a national trucking system, an aviation department in Gary, Indiana, Muhammad Speaks newspaper plant, which is a cold storage and warehouse. Farms in Michigan, farms in Georgia, farms in Alabama. The first shipload of fish from the unpolluted waters around the South American country of Peru has already arrived in Mobile, Alabama. It carried with it some 1,000 metric tons of fish, or roughly 2,200,000 pounds. The messenger, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, is moving to establish trade routes across the narrow strip of ocean between South America and Africa. He is also moving toward China.
From 1965 right up to 74, Elijah Muhammad was building the economic thing. And I became his national representative and was on the radio teaching across the country every week for 6 years. And he said to me, you know, Brother Farrakhan, I want you to take care of the spiritual while I'm working on the economic development.
Economics was one of our major programs. And we had business all across the country. We had everything. We had suitcases, clothes, dishes. We imported everything. Put it this way, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad put us in a position to supply everything the people needed. That's where we really grew, because foundation of selling is distribution. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad methodically put that together through mastering the Muhammad Speaks, getting those customers, gave you an absolute foundation of distribution nationwide. We had our own sales force. We didn't have to hire nobody, because the brothers were already trained to do all that. They already would take their paper customers and make their product customers. Minister Farrakhan, being the national spokesman on the radio every week, and he kept the spirit going.
As the minister kept the spirit of the nation going, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad was able to focus on the nation's economic development. The nation bought thousands of acres of farmland and began showing black people the importance of acquiring land. They went into international trade and commerce with countries such as China, Algeria, and Peru. Through these business relationships, the nation was able to bring millions of pounds of fish into America and began selling it door to door. Because of the great deals brokered by the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his staff, the nation was able to cut the price of the fish. This broke the hold that other distributors had on their rates and forced them to lower their prices.
One day the fish came in, I don't know how many 100,000 pounds, whole shipload. The whole ship was our fish, okay? We went down to pick up our fish. We had about 16 tractor trailers. And the man over in charge of the dock, he said, you couldn't get the fish because you had to be in the union to get the fish. Union workers wasn't working. So Captain Rashid, he was the captain then, he told him that we'll unload the fish ourselves. He said you couldn't do that because you had to be in the union. We had 200 men down there with them trucks. So the union told him to tell them that he can't do that, they're gonna shut us down. Captain Rashid said, he told him, said, you do what you have to do, we get that fish. And he got us the surveyor belts and loaded up that fish. That same time period, I was a national sales manager for a black company you may have heard about it called Magnificent Products. So I was in New York, I would be in Chicago, I'd be in Atlanta. I knew all the regional ministers and captains. So Allah blessed me to be in a position to travel like that. So I got a chance to see the progress of all the nations. The nation was full speed ahead.
The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad was doing something in America that had never been seen before. He was civilizing the black man and woman and building a nation within a nation. Due to the guidance of Elijah Muhammad and the hard work of his students, the Nation of Islam was growing at an astronomical rate. Leading the charge of these students was Minister Louis Farrakhan. His gift of speech, paired with his unmatchable work ethic, made him a standout among his peers. After the assassination of Brother Malcolm X in 1965, Elijah Muhammad assigned Minister Farrakhan the New York Mosque to succeed Brother Malcolm. Minister Farrakhan accepted the challenge and excelled all expectations. Under his leadership, New York became the #1 mosque in all categories. Soon, Minister Farrakhan was given the title National Representative of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Everyone can see something special was happening in New York City.
Mosque number 7, which was the real cornerstone mosque. New York was a very different mosque, I would say. Not different that we were unique and we had a different teaching. It was different because it was in the largest city in America. It was the Mecca of Black America. And so those who became involved in the Nation of Islam in that city were different automatically because of the city and what it represented. When Minister Farrakhan was in New York for those 10 years after Malcolm was assassinated, that 10 years he made an impact, not only in New York, but the whole nation, the Nation of Islam, and then he made an impact on the struggle of Black people at that hour. And the ministry class that the minister built, Malcolm started the first one. That's the one I joined. The minister knew Malcolm's intention was to make helpers for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm sent brothers from New York to California out here. That's how they got started in Mosque number 27. And he sent brothers to the Bay Area, Jabril and other brothers. He sent brothers to North Carolina. So the minister coming in and watching Malcolm work to establish mosques followed in those footsteps. I was already there, and I became the minister's top assistant. God gave me a gift, and that gift was I knew how to organize things and work with individuals. But a lot of it was drawn from what the minister was doing and what he would say out of his mouth, his vision. I mean, you know, if you don't have a vision of where you're going and what you would like to accomplish, then you can never get it done. But we would take his vision and then we would put it into reality, and that's how we move forward. And the gift that God had given him, his ability to reach people, touch people, for people to feel him. And at the root of it is that the minister not only talked about the love of the brotherhood or the sisterhood, he practiced it. And it was a genuine love that made him very special.
And whenever you want gold, you don't find gold on the surface of the earth. You got to go deep down under the surface to get gold. Whenever you want diamonds, you got to go deep down in the earth to get a diamond. Whenever you want a pearl, you got to go deep down in the ocean to get a pearl. And whenever you want the greatest of men, you got to go to that man who is deepest down in the mud of civilization. So the greatest of Black people are those who suffer the most. But among these brothers right here is a great Black general. Among them right now are scientists. Among these brothers right now are those that can fashion a world, but they don't know it, and the people will never see it until the mud is removed. And this is what Muhammad did for us. Say, you are the beautiful one. Not me, not us, but it's you, the people. The little life, it has but a short time to live. So if I can live this life to serve you and to serve you and to serve you, then that makes my life valuable. But there is no value to me if I don't serve you and help you. You understand? That's the way we're supposed to live. Right.
His calling to be the national representative of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, from he telling you about he wanted to help Black people when he was a young man looking for someone. And it made him just a kind of unique individual that was really cut out for this job. Every time that God blessed him to get on that rostrum and talk to the people that he was sent to teach from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he would touch them. I mean, people who may not have liked him because they loved Malcolm, but they could not leave that auditorium without being touched. And even though they were like the crab, a real hard shell on the outside, but under it is that tender crab meat that people like so much. They could have been hardened like that, but in their hearts, Minister Farrakhan would touch him. The people began to join. And what we saw in New York, over 3,000 believers, our schools, our buses, 21 business enterprises, and all of that was because the people loved what the nation and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was doing for them, and they had a minister standing in front of them that really pumped that love and showed the beauty of what we could do if we love and respect each other, what we could do together. But the minister because of his sensitivity, never talked about New York being the strongest and the biggest mosque, because Chicago was our headquarters. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was there, and he wasn't building a mosque to challenge the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He was building a mosque to be helpers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. We said that Chicago was number one.
I came to visit him. He said, "Come on, get in the car, I want to take you for a drive." And he took me down to Stony Island. And he looked over at the building. Now this is before we bought it. And he said, "I'd love to hear you preach a sermon in that place." I said, "Not me, dear apostle, you." He said it again. And I said, "Not me, you." And after I denied the second time, he said, "Well, who's the teacher?" I said, "You." And then he said, "I would love to hear you preach a sermon in that place." In 1972, during his Theology of Time lecture series, now he's teaching over there at the new mosque on Stony Island. He hears me in the audience bearing witness. He said, "I hear my minister." He said, "I want you to come down front. I like to keep my eye on my minister." And so the brothers that were on the front row of that particular seating arrangement moved a seat so I could sit down on the front row. So when I sat down on the front row, he looked over at me and shook his head and pointed to his seat, which was on the altar. Well, I had to come out and sit in his seat. He said to them at another time that he wanted them to listen to me,
Everywhere you hear him, listen to him.
to look at me,
Everywhere you see him, look at him.
go where I tell them to go, and
Everywhere he advised you to go, go. Everywhere he advised you to stay from, stay from. So we are thankful to Allah for this great helper of mine, Minister Farrakhan.
he was literally making me the leader of the Nation of Islam in his absence.
Despite Minister Farrakhan being the most successful minister and holding the highest ranking position under the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, when he departed February 1975, his family chose his son Wallace Muhammad to lead the Nation of Islam. Wallace was a very brilliant Islamic scholar. However, Wallace had major disagreements with the teachings of his father. So much so that when he assumed power, he immediately began making changes not only to the laws that had upheld the nation structure, but changes to the teachings themselves. Although these swift changes affected every individual differently, a lot of believers became lost and confused as they struggled to move forward in this new direction.
So the mindset was that the heir apparent was going to be Minister Louis Farrakhan. He was the national spokesman. He was articulate. The sincerity of his heart and what he felt about people and circumstances and how he could handle the message of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is the combination. He was good at it, just good at it.
You go and read about David and all of the sons that David had. There was one that he got from Bathsheba. His name was Solomon. And while all the others were desirous of his seat, when it came time, he just asked Solomon to come and sit in his seat. And that was to say so many things without saying, you just sit the man. Well, the family had another view, and I did too. I have to admit that I didn't feel qualified if Elijah Muhammad were dead to lead the nation, I really didn't feel qualified.
You know, it was a dark hour, and people were wondering what was going to be the next step, how was this going to go? But in their hearts and mind, they were looking to Minister Farrakhan because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad made him known to all of the people in and outside of the nation, and even he was beginning to be known in the world because the UN was in New York, and all of these nations that became independent were sending their ambassadors to the UN, and we were right there in New York, and so they were hearing about this Louis Farrakhan and so forth. By him being made known to the public by the messenger, being on the radio every week speaking for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the people looked to him, and if anything changed, they looked that he would be the one. I mean, I looked at myself as a hope to die follower of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, but I, as thousands of others, became confused because of the pronouncements of the new leader. Many people did not go with Imam Muhammad. They were, you know, too confused. The minister used to when darkness comes, stand still until you see some light that God would give you before you take the next step. And darkness did come over the nation. And there was a level of confusion. But in their confusion, they kept it to themselves so that the nation could remain intact and hopefully could move forward through this period.
I was not disappointed because I didn't feel adequate. If I had felt adequate, I would have challenged him. If I had challenged him, there would have been bloodshed in the nation. So God protected me by allowing me to feel this sense of inadequacy, even though his father set me in the seat. That was symbolic then.
When Warren Dean took over that particular day, Saviours Day 1975, and the minister spoke. If you go back and listen to his words.
We have learned the lesson of history. And that those who sit around waiting for fractions and split-offs, waiting for those who would be hungry for leadership and hungry for power, I want you to know this afternoon that our father Elijah Muhammad did not make us that kind of people. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad loved unity. He lived for unity. He fought for unity. And we today will fight that same fight and will keep the faith of Muhammad. And only in that faith will we find the unity and the strength that we need to help Minister Wallace D. Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam, carry on in the noble work of his father.
That was Allah speaking, because that was the words of protection. And like Jabril used to say, sometimes he said, some things must happen so other things can happen. Had not Warren Dean did what he did, you wouldn't have a Minister Farrakhan today doing what he's doing. God is orchestrating this whole thing. I've never taken God out of the picture. Everything that happens because his will or his permission. So he must be in the picture, right? If that statement is true.
After Elijah Muhammad was gone, Yusuf Shah, who was my captain, was taken out of New York and sent to Dallas, Texas, to be the minister. My chief assistant, which was Brother Akbar Muhammad, who was Larry 4X then, was taken out of New York and sent to St. Louis. So one day Akbar called me. He said,
I said that he should leave New York. After I went to New York and looked at them dismantling his work and then his reputation and all of the work and hard work that he did in New York. And he shouldn't stay there, in my opinion, and watch this go on, you know. I mean, he's a human being, and it had to impact him. People accusing him of stealing money and all of that was terrible. Now, I didn't know if he was going to follow what I suggested or not, But I knew that Allah had put it on my heart because he was my brother and I love him. I didn't want to see that kind of pain coming to a man who gave his all for what he believed.
And so after he talked to me on the telephone, I came here to Chicago and I asked Wallace D. Muhammad if I could come to Chicago to help him here. They were planning to remove me anyway. Before I could get back to New York, it was in the New York Times the next day, Farrakhan is going to be moved to Chicago. I was put on the west side to teach, upstairs in a storefront in the back. In a few weeks, it was full. We moved further down to a ballroom. In a few months, the ballroom was full. What to do with Farrakhan?
After I was in St. Louis for a year and a few months, the Imam asked me to come to Chicago and assist him. I was always trying to get the Imam to use Minister Farrakhan. And I used a simple principle. I said, Brother Imam, the people know Minister Farrakhan. I don't think I had the strength to say to him, they don't know you. This whole new generation, 2 generations of young Muslims coming in the nation, they don't know you. They know the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has a son named Wallace, but I couldn't bring myself to say it to him that way, so I found a way to say it that would not put that kind of pressure on me. I'm just confessing. I just said that Minister Farrakhan could help you. And the reason, Brother Imam, he could help you, because the people know him. He's been on that radio year after year. They hear him every Sunday. And so they know him. Even if they don't know him to shake his hand and sit down and break bread, but they know his voice. They know his spirit from that radio. So he could use that and get the people to know you. That's what I told him. And I don't know what was in his heart, but he didn't accept that from me. And then I suggested using the minister. The Caribbean is waiting, and that's his people. He knows the language and whatnot. And I told him, Mom, I said that perhaps he can go down and get things going in the Caribbean. And the minister did make a tour of the Caribbean.
So they arranged a tour for me. Well, that's like putting a rabbit in the briar patch. And when I went in the Caribbean, I mean, they came out by the thousands. And by the time I got to Guyana in South America, I was in a mosque and they were introducing me, and they started speaking very negative of Elijah Muhammad. And in that mosque, I threatened to whoop the imam. And I cussed, you know. I went back to my old days. And I said, I'd tear his butt up. And so someone was with me that was reporting my actions, and it got back to the imam, so they pulled me out of the Caribbean. So I met with the imam, and I told him 60% of what you teach I agree with, but 40% of it I don't agree with. He said, well, teach the 60% that you agree with. And he offered me 5 different mosques. And I told him, I'm afraid that if I teach the 60% that I agree with, some of the 40% that I disagree with will come out, and it will tend to confuse an already confused group of people. I think that I would rather go back into show business. I said I would like to do the life of Malcolm X. I believe I could play his life because I've walked up in his shoes. So he said, okay, but then he said, but don't do anything that would discredit the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And I said, I would never do that. And I left.
Before joining the Nation of Islam, Minister Farrakhan was a very popular musician. Given the violin by his mother at the age of 5, Minister Farrakhan quickly excelled in his craft. From performing and competing on nationally televised shows to headlining musical tours, the minister was undeniably a rising star. He gave it all up to help his leader and teacher, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad. So when the nation began going in a different direction, Minister Farrakhan decided to revert back to his first love.
The minister called me, told me he was coming to California, and he wanted me to get in touch with Jim Brown, because for lots of different reasons, because Jim Brown loved and respected the Honorable Elijah Muhammad so much, and he called Jim too. But Jim has a big house. He has a little house on the side that Minister Farrakhan stayed with. We used to meet at different entertainers' homes. He would tell them that one of the things he wanted to do maybe was to go into show business, but they didn't necessarily agree with him. In fact, one or two of them told him straight up. They didn't want to do it because it lowered his status. They looked at him as a good spiritual director, but that would bring them down to their level. They didn't think that he should do that, even though he was good at it. but he was better at what he was teaching from God's perspective. They decided they would help him, even though they didn't necessarily agree. So we were at the Continental Hyatt Hotel on Sunset Boulevard, and we talked to the restaurant manager and asked him, could we have a space in the back of the restaurant for private meetings? And he said yes. And so when different people that Minister Farrakhan had talked to come down and interview them about being a part of the movie, about the life of Malcolm X, when he's going to play the leading role, because he knew Malcolm better than anybody else. I was standing at the front door of the restaurant when people came in. I was like the maitre d' or the receptionist. While we were there, Jabril shows up. He wouldn't know my agenda of coming, because I hadn't seen him in a long time. I told him the minister was interviewing somebody, but let's go back and let him know you're here. So I took him back and showed him that we're here. And they embraced and did all that. The minister asked, would you mind waiting until he finished his interview? But Jabril had no problem with that. I went back to sit down in the booth with Brother Jabril, and Jabril had his brown paper bag in his hand. And he went in the paper bag. He said, here, I want you to read. So I was sitting in the booth. So I said, okay, I'll read it. He said, no, you got to read it right now. That's how Jabril is. So the minister came right at the point. I didn't get a chance to read it. Him and the minister went upstairs to the room. Jabril said he told the minister, and when he finished reading that he could talk. And he said, the minister, okay. He said, okay, but they didn't want to ask him another question. He said, no, when you finish reading it, then we can talk. Jabril left, and the minister stayed in the room. And the next day, I came by just to check on him Saturday morning. And I knocked on the door. He came to the door. I said, Assalamu alaikum. He said, wa alaikum salam. Like he never knew I was there. As he was walking away, he returned my greeting, and he had all these papers out on his bed. And I just said to myself, whatever you're doing, he don't need no to be disturbed. The next morning was Sunday morning. I came back to check on him again, but Jabril had got there before me. And they had already went through the whole thing. So the minister, he had told Jabril what he gave him to read has opened his eyes. I knew whatever it was going to change things, because I'd never seen a minister like that before.
The papers that Brother Jabril gave Minister Farrakhan on that day in September 1977 changed his life forever. It was pages from a book Jabril had been writing about the life of Jesus and its relevance to our struggle. Through his study of Scripture, Jabril knew Minister Farrakhan was destined to rebuild his teacher's work, so he made it his mission to help steer the minister toward destiny. To call Brother Jabril brilliant would be an understatement. His spiritual insight has proven to be nothing less of phenomenal. He gave the minister those pages on a Friday, and on that third day, a Sunday, Minister Farrakhan had awakened. Brother Abdul Wahid was the first to witness.
So I said, whatever you're going to be doing, I want to be with you. So we went for a walk down Sunset Boulevard. So he said he's going to fulfill all the things that the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad said he was going to do, but he didn't have time to do. And then he said, but I'm going to go further than that. I said, what do you mean you're going to go further than that? He said, because in order to be a good student, you have to excel what the teacher taught you. If I only went as far as that was, then I wouldn't be a good student. And Jabril, Allah sent him. Jabril said he had been trying to have that kind of meeting for 2 years, 2 or 3 years. Yeah, everything was timed right.
And my journey now takes me to Egypt, then to Saudi Arabia. And while I was in Mecca, I decided, that I would come back and rebuild the work of Elijah Muhammad. Well, then, I had to make an announcement of such. And when I did that, all of the forces that would come against me did.